I believe we're on.
All right.
Hi, everyone. This is a signature presentation of the Daw Center for the Arts. Where we're very, very elated to have be joined right now with Mark Torres, the great Mark Torres. A little word about the Daw first. Um, the Daw is an inclusive, accessible, and equitable art center in the heart of Pomona, and we're providing all the arts in a safe space for over 35 years. And we're here to both a gallery and as an art lab. So we're really, really, really thrilled to be joined this hour by the great Mark Torres, who we're gonna delve a little bit into the history of some of the work he's done and some of the history, much of the history of this country. So, Mark, can you tell us a little bit about travel tips for Atsalan?
Sure. I stumbled into radio in the late 1980s. I was a speech therapist coming out of UCLA. I was their top student in experimental linguistics, and UCLA was second only to MIT, with the great Noam Chomsky heading that department. And I actually got to see Noam Chomsky speak several times at UCLA, and man, what a prolific speaker he was. At that time, it was on Central America issues and U.S. exploitation, which pretty much has led to where we are today with mass immigration from Central American countries here to the U.S. Noam Chomsky outlined that in beautiful terms, and I thought he was a linguist. I went to one of his talks, and here he is bashing the United States foreign policy, where they were moving indigenous people off their lands that they've lived on for thousands of years, which forced them into the cities to become impoverished. And they took over those lands to put multinational corporations in there to take all of their natural resources. And, at one point, a buddy of mine said, "Hey, man, you want to check out this KPFK radio station?" And I went down. I was like, "Whoa, this is pretty cool." So I got at that time, you needed to get an FCC license to be able to broadcast. Now anybody can turn on their camera and start broadcasting all over the universe. But my first gig was as a board op in about 1989 or close to 1990 at KPFK. And I, at that time, used to go check out Chicana music at this club called Troy Cafe. It was on First and Alameda, downtown Los Angeles, where bands like Quetzal, Lisa Flores, Aslan Underground, Chicano Secret Service was a satire group that now has born Lalo Alcaraz, that everybody knows from La Cucaracha. All this great stuff was going down thanks to two patrons, Sean and Bibby Hansen. And I was like, wow, if I didn't stumble into this cafe for poetry and music, like you'd never hear this stuff in a million years. And in all of LA, this is nuts. So I immediately wrote up a proposal and gave it to the program director at KPFK in about 1990. And the response I got was, "There's no Latinos in LA, and nobody would be interested in this." And and I kept on it for 5 years. And in 1995, that program director left, and the new program director said, "Whoa, this is a great idea." So it actually didn't go on the air until 1995, but I'd been thinking about it for 5 years. And we used to have Chicano music specials from time to time where I'd bring up live bands. Let's see, there were various live bands at that time and some that didn't exist yet, but the whole purpose was to bring this amazing, rich collection of talent from our communities in all areas, and that includes fine arts, graffiti art, poetry, cinema, theater, and music, of course, and put it on the airwaves to share it with a much bigger Los Angeles audience that had no idea it existed in their own backyard.
Yeah. In the conducting of these interviews, the Troy Cafe has come up a number of times actually. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about just what the environment was like at the time in the mid '90s or early '90s over at Troy Cafe?
Yeah. Well, Sean Carrillo, I think, really helped spearhead this. He was one of the later members of a performance art group coming out of East LA called OSCO. And that started in the 70s with Harry Gamboa, Patsy Valdez. There was a whole collective of Harry Gamboa, the whole collection of artists in all sorts of fields. Gronk is an amazing artist to this day, and Sean Carrillo kind of got there at the later end of this in the late '70s and early '80s, and he was always a champion of Chicano culture. Self-help graphics was really the go-to space for our communities in the arts, and Sean Carrillo just thought, I'm going to give this a go with a little cafe. Well, I will build a stage, and they will come. And his partner, Bibi Hansen, who many people may or may not know, is the mother of the pop artist Beck, and so you could go to Troy Cafe in the earliest '90s and see Beck up there doing folk songs solo. But Sean Carrillo and Bibi Hansen gave the stage to our East LA communities. Now you have to remember, at this time, there's no internet, there's no YouTube, there's no Facebook, there's no Instagram Live, there's no nothing, and the clubs that really existed were on the Sunset Strip, and they would not book these bands. The radio stations would not play these bands. The record companies would not sign these bands. The whole industry was designed not to have anything to do with any of these groups. So I pushed forward to have a Troy Cafe-like experience on the airwaves. Troy Cafe was hugely influential and important to give these emerging artists a space to show their crafts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that explains why Beck speaks so much Spanish in his songs.
Orale.
Orale, yeah. Well, the milieu that he was in is just it's a very Spanglish environment that he actually
Very much.
came up in. So that's a very interesting story for our audience here. What you say about the Troy Cafe and the necessity to bring a travel tips to restaurant, it reminds me of some stories I've heard. I mean, I heard on an interview the comedian Gabriel Iglesias talking about how he was unable to book like the Laugh Factory, the this, that, the other, these traditional avenues towards stardom and wherever here in Los Angeles, and he could only do like these like signature Latino nights. These like kind of like the third Wednesday afternoon of every other month type deal. So he ended up playing backyards, quinceañeras, Mexican restaurants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like there is the other story that comes to my mind is the question of this book called American Dirt, where you find the publications oftentimes like not an accurate portrayal, and definitely not even one of us making an accurate portrayal. So in many ways, it seems like we're blocked from these kind of mainstream avenues of attention. So we got to kind of do it ourselves. And I think that you really over the years have really laid a template for how we should do these things for ourselves. Can you speak to that? Like, why are we so blocked, and what must we do?
Well, I was just speaking with my dad earlier today about this very issue. I'm editing this interview with the showrunner, which is basically the boss of the Starz original series Vida, which will air later tonight. And my dad happened to be walking by. He's 87 years old. He was born in 1932 in the middle of the Depression. His parents came from Mexico um, during the Mexican Revolution in 1918. Um, they had 4 children that died from the flu that took place, and my dad was the last of 9 surviving. And he lived the ultimate immigrant experience, first generation living in America. And our conversation went like, isn't it amazing that we grew up and were born and lived in Los Angeles, which in many ways is the media, Hollywood, film, and music capital of the world. And none of us know anything about the industry. Like, we have no access to any of this. It's an insider game that is, I don't know if it's purposefully avoiding us, but fortunately, our stories are so rich that we are breaking through efforts that are extraordinary. People have to do extraordinary things to break through, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of help either. Once somebody breaks through, it's like, whoa, I made it, and I'm going to rest on my success and not necessarily help the next generation. But the fact of the matter is, Latinos here, represent a giant percentage of the population, yet only a fraction of that percentage is represented in the media. Our stories aren't being told, and the crews aren't being hired. Actors, musicians, I mean, just in the film industry alone, from the bottom on up. I don't care if you're a grip, a gaffer, or a writer or a director, actor, or even somebody, a shot caller up at the top. We just don't have the representation that will greenlight our story projects. But it's slowly but surely changing, in my estimation, not fast enough. But Travel Tips was really a community effort to make sure that while this transition is taking place, there was always a safe place for people to call their own.
Yeah. And you've been doing this for 25 years now. 25 years. Can you tell our audience a little bit about some acts that have broken through to a degree, or to whatever degree we're allowed to, on the national stage, that actually first were aired on Travel Tips for Aslan?
Sure. You know, since there wasn't a lot of recorded music, I made my 2-hour show format so that the first hour was CDs and albums, and the second hour was a live performance. So that was a way to counter the lack of support that the bands had in the music industry. Back then, we didn't have as many home studios either. Now you can go into your bedroom and produce a masterpiece. But then, we needed studios, access to high quality microphones, recording rooms, those sort of things. Well, I had a meeting with one of the island record people who was there at the very beginning of reggae breaking out. And he had heard my show, Travel Tips, and he wanted to meet with me. And he said, it's very interesting what you're doing with the Chicano and Latin alternative music scene, because this is exactly what happened in Jamaica when the poor but very talented young reggae musicians couldn't afford, you know, lunch, let alone a recording studio. They used to go down to the local community radio stations, go into the live room and record live sessions. He's like, you're doing like what they were doing in the 60s. And I didn't know that story, but I felt pretty proud that we were allowing this beautiful studio at KPFK. It's 2 stories tall, wood floors, grand piano, beautiful space, opening that up to our great talent in the Latin music scene. So some of the early bands, the very first band I had on live was Lisa Flores. Shortly after that, I had Quetzal, who's gone on to win a Grammy with their Folkways recording. Um, Oso Motley came a little bit after them, and they did their first live radio performance on my show, and they were actually the first band to win a Grammy from our scene. And they were signed. They were the first band that got signed to a major record label. That was Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss. They were the founders of A&M Records, which of course brought us Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass and Sergio Mendes and Brazil '66, and they sold A&M Records. But in the late '90s, they wanted to get back into the game. So they added another letter of their name. A was for Albert and M was for Moss. So Albert did A and L and Moss did M and O, and they formed Almo Records. So I went to, after the live performance on my show, I went with Oso Motley on a trip to Cuba during this socialism and art festival that took place in 1998. And Jesse Helms, who was a Republican senator, was saying how he was going to charge any American who went there, a $35,000 fine. And we were like, we're going. and and so I was their live engineer at most of their performances, including this giant stage at the Malecon on the beach, which had 30,000 people at least. It was an amazing festival. Everybody from all over the world, of course, could go there legally, except us in the United States. So it was packed, and it was wonderful. So they came back and recorded their first record for Almo Records, and it won a Grammy. So shortly after that, Beto Arcos, who came to help he formed the Global Village Music Show at KPFK, and he knew that I had been doing a lot of live music on my show, including Oso Motley, which was, a big success story for our scene, like the first band to win a Grammy. And they got started on KPFK and Travel Tips for Aslan. And he said, "Hey, Mark, I met this group in Oaxaca, and they're really cool. Will you help me engineer this?" And I'm like, "Sure, who is it?" And he said, "It's a group called Leela Downs." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So Leela Downs came up in 1998 and did their first live radio performance. And actually, KPFK released a CD of that performance, which is rare and very cool to have. She would go on to be cast to perform in the Selma Hayek project Frida, and they would win a Grammy. And then, more grassroots groups like La Santa Cecilia came up and won a Grammy. Gabby Moreno, who is from Guatemala but lives here in Los Angeles, she performed 3 times on my show, and she won a Latin Grammy. So, there's a lot of groups that have gotten an opportunity to play thanks to KPFK and Travel Tips for Aslan, and has really given the scene a boost and, like I said, a home, so that even if other stations don't find them economically cool enough, or they don't have a big enough fan base, they always know that they can come to Travel Tips for Aslan to be heard.
Yeah, yeah. No, that is incredible. That is incredible. Yeah, an interesting phenomenon has been happening over the last few years is this kind of it's always been going. It's always been around, but this kind of ease into kind of Spanglish lyrics, right? This kind of it's never been this easy. It's always been like there's this big distinction, right? Um, but this kind of thing. I had Nancy Sanchez on recently, talking about how her songwriting how it can like be be in English, then be in Spanish, kind of the way people talk. Can you speak a little bit to like these new kind of trends that we're seeing? Um,
Yeah, I think it really.
Ron is so important and pushing.
Sure. Our families speak Spanish at home. Now, in my dad's generation, he was born in the '30s, um, so in the late '40s and early '50s, when he was going to high school, he would get punished, he would get beaten, he would get ridiculed. Talk about the type of bullying that takes place. That was commonplace back then, and there was no repercussions or accountability for teachers back then. He went to Cathedral High School, which is near Chinatown. My dad grew up in downtown Los Angeles, first on Cedar Street, and then later on 27th Street and Hoover near USC. At the time, the closest Catholic school, my sweet abuela was a devout Catholic, so she sent them over to Cathedral High School. And speaking Spanish you would get punished. And he was speaking to all of his friends in Spanish, and the type of demonization of Mexicans and immigrants and Spanish was cruel. I mean, we find it to be super cruel now. There's kids in cages today and they're dying. Um, and I have to say, it was worse when my dad was growing up. People would get deported, they would get murdered, um, and everything in between. And there was absolutely no accountability because we didn't have any representation. Now we have mayors, police chiefs, and other councilmen and other types of district attorneys. We have a lot of people in our infrastructure that can help us, but that was not in place back then. It was a white world, and the Spanish language, it was suspect at the very least. And so we've seen in recent history how Spanish, I mean, it not only is it more acceptable, but it's actually cool. I mean,
Right.
when you see people like Beck using Spanish phrases, or do you see people doing fist bumps? I mean, we learned that as kids growing up on the streets. Now everybody's bumping. um,
Everybody's bumping. Yeah, I love it.
I mean, our all of our culture is being exploited now. Of course, they want to have our food, our dance, our culture, our graffiti, our aesthetic, our clothing styles, our hairstyles, our look, and then they want to deport the rest of us.
Right. Well, I
But
mean, yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, and this is no disrespect or shade or whatever term you want to use towards Beck. I mean, he's a great artist. He's very does very interesting things. But it does say something that, like, out of that whole cafe scene where so many people came, Beck is the one to go worldwide. And I mean, this happens time and time and time again. I mean, there's all this kind of like grabbing a piece of our culture, which is fine. If you're from the area, you're from the area. Like Sublime would be another example. Um, but it's never us. We're never the ones. You know what I'm saying? It's never us that are selling a million records. It's never us being pushed by major labels. It's never us. It's always people around us taking a part of us and then becoming these global phenomenons.
Yeah, there's a lot of exploitation and there's a lot of culture vulturing going on, but at the same time, the talent is in our communities, and there
Yeah,
are some people that do take chances, and we just have to create an environment where when we do make it, we don't make it a solitary moment that's tied just to us. We have to bring up the next generation. We have to bring up opportunities for the great talent that is out there in every environment. Like, for example, in the Pacifica Radio Archives where I work, we have a lot of great poets, but poetry has always been an essential part of Travel Tips for Aslan from the very beginning. I would have poets on all the time. And, you know, even when, for example, last year I had a live 3 event production at the Civic Center Studios, I had poetry be part of what I'm doing. And, somebody who is also a appreciator of poetry, Greg Palast, happened to go down one of those days and met you for the first time. And this is, Greg Palast is a guy that can tell you about poetry from the Beat generation on up. And, here he is realizing, oh my goodness, the Chicano community has great poetry as well. So, we just have to keep outreaching until those establishment people realize where this talent is. And our talent is so rich, and our work ethic is so high that our working twice, three, four, five, 10 times as hard as somebody else is going to pay off down the road. I'm a
Yeah.
positive guy.
Yeah, and I believe it. And 25 years of not just, you know, I mean, you're not just a historian of this movement, you're also a history maker. I mean, there are things that have happened in the world that would not have happened had you not done the things you have done. So, I mean, clearly, that attitude is the right attitude, and it has reaped many results. I think, though, it's not just a question of the musicians and whatever. I mean, the historians of this movement, the keepers of knowledge of this movement, they also have to reflect this movement. And I think that you Mark, like people need to know who you are, and people need to know what you've done, and people need to not just do that just so that you get credit, so you feel good, or your parents are proud of you, but they need to do that because they need to see you as an authority on this, so they can learn more because you know more. So I mean, I'm very invested. I am in the Mark Torres business, and I will be for life.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure.
Hey, we got a question from one of your viewers here, from
Let's take the
David
question. Let's take
Romero.
the question. Do you go to various venues and community art spaces for fun and or to scout talent for the show? Who are some of the new artists you're excited about?
Okay, well, thanks, David, for that question. And I used to go out a lot more. I mean, when you are young, you want to see as many spaces as you can. And there weren't that many actually back in those days, but there are now. And yes, when I'm invited, I go or I stumble on things where I see a lot of amazing talent. I was invited over to the Dawes Center for the Arts in Pomona. What I knew about Pomona was the radio station out there, KSP. I can't even remember what they are. KSPCA. We called it K Space back in the day, but they have a great radio station. And I used to go out to Pomona, and going to the Dawes Center for the Arts showed me, a lot of great talent that's out in the Inland Empire. There's great talent in Riverside. There's great talent everywhere. So yes, I'm always keeping my eyes open. I'm always handing out my card. I love to travel. My show's called Travel Tips for Aslan. And I wanted to use the word Aslan because not a lot of people know what that is, especially not outside of the Chicano community. And I wanted to be able to answer that question that, Aslan was a mythological place that the Chicanos used and embraced in the 60s when they were trying to empower themselves and find a newfound respect for our rich history and ancestry with all of our indigenous cultures here in this land, and also, back in Mexico. It's so rich with indigenous culture. So I wanted people to ask about that. And, traveling is just something that I love to do. Travel. I went on a tour of Mexico in 1987 where I didn't know where I was going to go. I landed in Mexico City and had this whole itinerary, and ended up going to completely different places: Cuernavaca, Oaxaca, San Cristobal de las Casas, before the Zapatistas emerged, but were organizing at that time. And I found so much beautiful music and clothing, art, like everything. So travel has been a giant part of my journey, and that includes, traveling to community centers all around Los Angeles, and they're everywhere. And Orange County, San Diego, San Francisco, anywhere you go, there's a huge network of community centers. And yes, I'm open to receive music, and I get music sent to me from all over the world. People know my email address at mexicanspitfire1@yahoo.com, and they contact me through Instagram. I'm also Mexican Spitfire, and I have a Travel Tips for Aslan Facebook page. So
Yeah.
People DM me all the time, and I play it.
We'll put the links down below. Um, yeah, the name of this presentation actually is Mark Torres, Man of the People, Traveler of Aztlan. Right, that's what we decided to call this talk. So I want to kind of make a little transition right here.
Sure.
We've talked about travel tips for Aztlan. We could talk for hours about travel tips for Aztlan and all the different things, and maybe in the future we should revisit an idea of creating some type of longer feature type thing that might be filmed. I don't know what those are like. Anyhow, but you wear a couple hats, and one of the other hats is one of the other major hats you wear is that of the I forget exactly your title, but with the you work with the Pacific
Director.
director of the Pacific Archive. So you tell us a little bit about the Pacific Archive and what it is for those who might not be so familiar.
Sure. Pacifica Radio started in 1949. It was the first community radio network in America. And the Los Angeles station, KPFK, started in 1959. And the archives formed in the 70s when they realized, oh, wow, we need to put the five Pacifica station history in one place. So there are now to date over 60,000 recordings, and now we digitally record 24 hours a day. So there's infinitely more recordings happening at all times. But, we were there to record some unique presentations by people who have really made an impact and changed the world, from Rosa Parks' very first interview after she got out of jail doing her bus boycott action. The earliest Martin Luther King recording that I know of from 1957, when he was talking about this concept called pacifism, how you might be able to negotiate things and change the world through nonviolent means. Of course, he was labeled a communist back in those days, but we all know how great the man was over the years. So, yeah, as an archivist, not only do I embrace history in general, and we're getting a big dose of history learning today. It's very important to know our history so we don't repeat these mistakes. So I take this job real seriously, and it's fun. It's enjoyable for me to learn about history. And one of the things that really popped up most recently, since we're in a quarantine situation, is the news stories that are coming out telling us about the 1918 flu. And that affected my dad's parents' family and his brothers and sisters who died in that epidemic. First of all, the first thing I learned in knowing about that history is that they called it the Spanish flu, and they were demonizing Native Americans, Mexicans, immigrants, and just like what we're hearing today, except that flu originated on an army base in Kansas. So it's like, wait a minute. We're seeing everything that we're dealing with today back in 1918, except that our president didn't know that history, and he didn't know the difference between people that resisted self sequestering and quarantining and social distancing, and people that resisted saying, this is un-American. I want my freedom. I'm keeping the place open. And half the city died. He didn't, this was before antibiotics, even in 1918. So it turns out that we've had a case history on our own land that we haven't even learned from, because, we're having governors not locking down and opening back up, saving the economy. And we already know what happened during the last pandemic 100 years ago. So, as the director of the archives, there's tons of recordings from people who could teach us things that we need to know so that we don't make those same mistakes today.
Yeah. Yeah, again, so we have some questions about music, and we're gonna get to the Q&A later. But there's a few more questions I want to ask you about the archives before we return to
Okay.
that. So again, you are very much, as you just presented this history of what was, called the Spanish flu, Spanish influenza, that actually wasn't really too much about demonizing Castilians. It was more about our community.
Yeah.
But you also, again, are something, a historian as well as a history maker. So can you tell us a little bit about what your involvement was with the battle for Seattle?
Okay. Well, I was the technical director of Radio Nation, which was the radio version of the Nation magazine. And the Nation magazine is the longest continuously published journal of opinion in America. It started in 1895, I believe. And just a quick little story. I actually was the technical director of Radio Nation in 1996, and we went to the Republican convention in Philadelphia. And one of the Republican senators, Arlen Specter, invited journalists to one of his gatherings, and it was at the one of the union halls there that Ben Franklin started or championed, which happened to be the location of the first library in America. It was Ben Franklin's personal collection, and it goes back to the like 1500s maybe. And on this day, you got to wander in there. Like now, you have to make an appointment or it's closed. I don't know. You can't get in there very easily, but I went in there and I found the first edition of the Nation magazine from 1895 there, which was amazing. So fast forward to the Battle of Seattle, which is 1998, and this was an effort for labor championed by unions and other workforces, teachers unions, mechanical workers, dock workers, automobile workers, Teamsters, like all of the labor forces got together and were resisting this international force that was trying to create an environment where they could exploit our labor at very low wages. So we all mobilized into Seattle. I was a technical director. I went up several weeks ahead of time and set up a base camp of broadcasts for the Nation magazine, Radio Nation, Amy Goodman and Democracy Now, and Jim Hightower show based out of Texas. And we were in a basement of a church in between ground zero, where all the protests were going, and the jail where everybody was arrested and held. So we would get forces marching back and forth right in front of us the whole time. And during when we were not broadcasting live, I was out getting stories with my, at that time, mini disc recorder. It was a digital recorder on these little discs. And several times, man, we were in the middle of it all, raging, and we got great stories. And in fact, Mark Cooper, who's the host of Radio Nation, he won one of the very nice LA Media Awards that year for our coverage. And I have to say, my editing on those was extraordinary. Blending in the field recordings from the writing that was taking place, along with the incredible writing of Mark Cooper and his narrative that was taking place. So it was great teamwork, and but it was nuts. Amy Goodman, people who do not know her work ethic, her show went on at 6 a.m. and I would literally be working until midnight or 2 a.m. And then Amy Goodman would come and pick me up at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. to begin editing her show. And I would be editing. We didn't have really good editing stations at that time. So I was it was a great adventure, and the WTO, as a result of the Battle of Seattle, they left. President Clinton, arrived to try and save the day, but the forces of labor won that day, and the dock workers shut off every port from Canada to Mexico until the WTO left. And can you imagine how many billions were waiting at sea to port in the ports up and down the coast. That was an incredible effort where labor won, and this big bad bureaucracy lost. So it was very amazing to be part of that at Ground Zero.
Tell us about Rage Against the Machine and the convention.
Okay, well, now we fast forward a couple of years to the 2000 convention in Los Angeles, and the mayor of Seattle um, was reprimanded for putting tear gas at protesters who were on a street in Seattle that was about like our Melrose here in Los Angeles, which means very trendy and commercial on one street, but behind the buildings on both sides were residents. So I was actually having dinner with a friend, what I thought was outside of the downtown area. It was several miles away, but there was a spontaneous labor protest, and the mayor and the police chief decided to put tear gas to clear the protesters, which blew into everybody's, you know, place of dwelling. We were in a restaurant. We got gassed. We ran out, got gassed some more. Um, Families with kids, they were getting gassed because it blew over, one street away. So the police chief actually got fired as a result, and the mayor, uh, sent down a warning to Los Angeles ahead of the 2000 convention that these protesters were going to be reformulating, except in Los Angeles. And so the mayor of Los Angeles at the time put up these paramilitary uh, troops that were infiltrating, organizing, and protesting, and the art making and such. And there was a concert that was formulated. I was actually working and managing a band at the time. They were called East LA Sabor Factory. They were short-lived but high energy in the same way as Oso Motley was. And on this day, I think it was East LA Sabor Factory, Oso Motley, and Rage Against the Machine at this performance space outside the convention center. And when Rage Against the Machine started playing, the troops and the National Guard started moving in on the protesters, and it created this, again, tear gas and mayhem and madness going on. And, we were supposed to put on a show later that evening, and we were like, holy cow, man, this is crazy. So, once again, we see when people are trying to, self determine their own destiny, there are forces that are working to keep us from getting there. And Rage Against the Machine was a great um, rally, musical soundtrack to, revolutionary type action where the people just would not stand that type of oppression anymore. Ironically, Rage Against the Machine was supposed to come back and was scheduled to play at this year's Coachella, which unfortunately, because of this coronavirus outbreak, Rage Against the Machine did not, you know, present themselves publicly for the first time in many, many years. So, anyways, the Battle of Seattle and the Battle of Los Angeles 2000 both were pretty amazing to be at Ground Zero for.
Yeah, yeah. I've always wondered. I've always found it kind of puzzling how it's very odd to me that like even when we do break through, so like Rage Against the Machine, along with probably Public Enemy, probably the two largest groups to ever break through with like really radical politics, like really really radical politics, probably two biggest, right? And yet, the fact that Zach Chicano is like kind of just like he's just kind of ambiguously brown man in the public imagination. I'd say. I mean, not. That's not to anything to do with him. I mean, Zach, it's not hidden. I mean, he's got the song "People of the Sun." He's many songs. He did the thing. The Rage Against the Machine. They documented themselves going to Mexico and with the Zapatistas and.
By the way, just as a side note, I happened to go down to the Battle of Mexico City with Zach and Rage Against the Machine. That was an incredible show. I was actually the last person in before Zach did not have confidence that he would be able to sell out a large arena. So instead, he put up a 5,000 person tent outside the Palacio del Deportes,
Yeah.
um, not thinking he would be able to sell it out.
Mm.
And not only did it sell out, but there was probably 50,000 kids that tried to crash the fences, and they came out with water cannons to blast them off these fences. And it was an incredible show. That was Tijuana No from Tijuana, Mexico. Aslan Underground, another Chicano band from LA, and Rage Against the Machine. And that one was videotaped by MTV. And you can actually see the energy of that show on DVD. It's available still today. But yeah, I saw Zach and his energy. He can rally millions. His The only thing I will say about Zach, and this is something that I know and I respect him and love him as a brother, but he has like acute anxiety being in the public. He does not like and or embrace interviews. He's not really a good public figure. He's got a lot of anxiety issues until he's on stage. And then when he's on stage, he's a madman. And poetry and Allen Ginsberg and Zapatismo and everything comes pouring out and
Yeah.
it resonates with people. And then as soon as he steps off, completely different person.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually relatively common. I mean, you hear similar stories, all kinds of artists. Michael Jackson, probably the most famous one. But there's so many cases of people who are, in the when the lights go on, it's time to go, and when they go out, it's like, what do you want from me? And it actually makes a lot of sense to me too, because like when the lights are on, you know what you're supposed to do. When you're just talking to people, it can go in any direction. Like there's no structure. I don't know what's going on here. So that makes sense. Why don't we turn to some of these questions now?
Okay.
I was going to ask you a question about. I was transitioning from that, and then you just told a story that was the answer to my question. So
Okay.
thanks, Mark. I'm supposed to look. I'm supposed to look smart too here. Okay.
I'm
Anyway.
reading your mind.
All right. So, question. Let's go with Gabriel first. What do you see as artistic differences and similarities between 90 artists in the alt Latin scene and now?
Okay. Well, I mean, 90 Latin alternative was a term that was actually invented in the 90s to try and make sense of what our communities were outputting because we were trying everything. There was so many things that moved people. I mean, who were our influences in the 90s? Well, we had Santana, we had Richie Valens, we had Los Lobos, we had a few of the punk rock groups from the late 70s and early 80s, Alice Bag, and others. And the direction was just all over the place. It wasn't focused, so you would hear rock elements, punk elements, ska elements, and the lyrical content was really about our immediate concerns in our community. And then Zapatismo took place when the Zapatistas emerged in 1994. And all of a sudden, there was a different type of political community awareness, like a rebirth of the 60s Chicano movement in a much bigger and profound way, because it wasn't just our Mexican experience, it was more like a way of indigenous life that existed outside of our training in school or our hypnotism in school. um, so the 90s Latin alternative was super fresh. Anything anybody did was at the same time I've never heard it before, and at the same time, oh, that sounds like The Cure, or that sounds like Santana, or that sounds like Los Lobos. There was a lot of that going on. But I would say that today we are having a whole new different experience in the Latin alternative scene. First of all, Spanish, I think, is much more profound, much more both political and poetic. I think that our voice in Spanish has improved beyond, um, simple conversational Spanish and into profound poetry. And, that is a beautiful thing to see. And then, of course, musically speaking, now there's with the internet and being able to see 250,000 Instagram live performances in one day. The musical influence is so profound that musically speaking, we're having a lot of different things. And then some of the traditional, I'm going to speak for Mexico, but this is true for traditional music of South America, tango and bachata and salsa and other things. You will see people hybriding, one, two, three, four, five, six different things, combining it into their own sense of music, which has unique melodies and phrasing. So, today it's like it's a really profound and fresh experience across the board, and so '90s it was new. It was few. There were very few people doing it because people couldn't make a living, and if you wanted to be a poor starving artist, how long can you do that? And how many people are committed to that for life? That was very few. Today, there's just way more opportunity to do that. So there's a lot more people doing it. And so
Yeah,
subsequently, a lot of fresh new ideas.
yeah. Well, salute to the new, the few, and the true. They pave the road every day, right? All right. So, the next question: if you had only 5 albums to take with you on a desert island, what would they be?
Oh man, you're killing me here.
I didn't do it.
Um, okay, that's a tough one, man. But I will go for both speed and size. Albums built for speed and albums built for size. Um, let's see. I would probably take the Los Lobos album Kiko. I feel like that is a profound psychedelic experience. Beautiful songwriting, beautiful musicianship, really something special. Mexico City's Natalia Lafourcade, I would probably take her Hasta La Raíz album because it too also combines so many beautiful elements. And that's another great album of um, poetry in Spanish. Just beautiful concepts, things that will inspire you. It would give me hope that even though I'm on this island, I will figure out a way to happiness, whether it's me staying here or being inspired to chop down some coconut trees and build a raft and head back to civilization. But more than likely, if I had a good stereo system and 5 good records, I'd probably want to stay on the island. Let's see. I
That
would
was,
probably,
that was
I would
strange
probably,
and beautiful. But we're going.
um, I would probably take, a Rage Against the Machine record. Like, oh my gosh, um, it's hard to choose which one, but I might take the Battle of Los Angeles with me. I would probably take one of the early rock and Espanol bands. I would probably take my Los Olvidados record. It's the first one that they did. And man, that was a moment that brings the thing about albums is they bring you back to a moment in your life that you can relate to, that somebody today may hear it and say, that sounds like early, Spanish rock. I'm not into it. I don't dig it. But for me, from what I've been through, to see how these kids from Mexico came to Los Angeles for whatever reason, whether they were dragged or came uh, wanting to seek a better life. They figured out a way to create some beautiful music with really no infrastructure to help them succeed. They just wanted to do it. They created their own scene. Los Olvidados will have to probably be on that list. Another record I would have to put up one of the Quetzal records in, because again, that takes me to a time I knew these guys when I knew Quetzal when he was maybe just out of high school. Very bright and enthusiastic, but politically motivated, like me and my family. Like, as much as I need art in my life, I need politics in my life, because I see how people manipulate it. I see how that the game that we are forced to play has rules that exclude us, and has rules that give other people benefits, like in Shoots and Ladder, like ladder on up to the top because of their circumstances, or where they were randomly born into some family, something like that. And Quetzal has that type of DNA, and that comes out in the lyrics. Martha Gonzalez and him have put together an amazing team that takes a look at issues that concern us, whether it's women's issues or immigrant issues or injustice anywhere. So I would have to take a Quetzal record. And do I want Imaginaries, or do I want, their first self-titled record? I don't know. It would be one of them. How many is that? Is that
That's
four?
five.
Do I need one more?
I think that's five. Or you
Okay.
can
Well,
start with you know what, you want one more. I can tell you want one more. So
yeah,
whether it's
if
start
I'm going to do one
like
more,
Dirty Harry, or you feeling lucky, punk. I mean, you can go. Keep going.
if I'm going to take another record, um, I would probably take a record by Maria del Pilar, Songs and Canciones, volumes 1 or 2 or both. She did a track called uh, like, let's see, immigrant es illegal. Oh, Ilegal en Estyle. And when I first talked to her about this, I asked her if it had a political motivation, if um, if it was about the undocumented, illegal experience, but doing it in style. And really early on, I don't think that she embraced that, but she does now. And I actually did a show that had La Santa Cecilia and Maria del Pilar and a bunch of groups. And the name of the show over at the Echoplex was called Ilegal en Estyle. And it was inspired by her song. And, that was many years ago when it first came out. And I've seen that people, like in the LA Times or LA Weekly, somebody was talking about, the greatest immigrant protest songs. And that was in there. But I don't think people know that early on she didn't think of it that way, but I did, and she does now. and so I would probably take either a record from her or Chicano Batman. There's so many great groups out there right now, that, wow, only taking five, I'd probably be thinking about all the albums that I didn't bring with me.
Well, Mark, we do live in a world of shoots and ladders where some
Does
are
anybody even know that game in the era of Xbox and PlayStation?
some people are, they walk into a place and they're shot to the very top, without whatever. But there are no shortcuts in Atlan. If you really want to know things, you have to do the thing. And
Yeah.
you are a living encyclopedia of knowledge and experience. You are a champion of our community. You are an asset to our community. I would encourage everyone watching now to reach out to Mark Torres, bring him to your classrooms, bring him to where, talk about travel tips for Atlan, learn the history of travel tips for Atlan, access this wealth of knowledge. This champion of our community, Mark Torres. Mark, we really need to get you out there more. There's so much you have to offer, and that's just what needs to happen. So, Mark, do you want to like leave any final words? Anything you really want people to take away from this experience here?
Sure. You can listen to my show, Travel Tips for Aslan. It's KPFK 90.7 FM, Saturday nights, 10 to midnight. Tonight, I have a wonderful interview with Tanya Saracho, who has a incredible immigrant experience growing up in Mexico, moving to Texas at age 13, moving to Chicago and working with theater, moving to LA and becoming a writer, and then having 3 seasons on the Starz original series Vida telling our stories. Really, it's a fantastic story. And the interview was conducted by myself and Nancy Sanchez, who is currently my co host on Travel Tips. So tune in tonight, 10 p.m. to midnight. Also, you can go to my Instagram page, which is Mexican Spitfire 1 for me. I also have a Travel Tips for Aslan Instagram page. And I'm going to be doing, like you are doing, Matt, Instagram lives every Wednesday at 6 p.m. with various people in the community. While we're sequestered and quarantined, this is a good way to stay in contact with people. So let's stay in contact. I can't wait to hug all of you.
It's been a trip talking to you.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
thank you, Matt. You've come up to my show several times to read poetry, and you were part of our live remote broadcast at Civic Center Studios. And, I've told you this before, but I'll let our audience know that, I've listened to one of the great poets of our time, James Baldwin, give a whole speech on the responsibility of artists and poets in times of crisis. And, you know, it's times like this where I believe poets are needed most. On my Instagram, Mexican Spitfire, I promoted this. And I don't know if you read my little thingy. I wrote a little summary of what was going on. And I summarized Matt Cedillo as a born poet who can dissect the unimaginable and present it in perfect, simple truths. I don't know if that captures who you think you are, but it does for me. And that's why I have poetry as an important component of my radio show.
Well, you heard it first. I'm part of
I
part of
mean,
the
don't you
history.
think? I mean, don't you think, man? Because I think,
No, I appreciate it. No,
I
I
mean,
really, yeah.
imagining this president telling us to inject ourselves with disinfectant. I mean, those are unimaginable things.
Or
And
everyone's forgetting the heat lamp part. He also said that we need to like put light into our bodies. Everyone's forgetting that part. But
so the poems that you make based on these unimaginable things really dial us all back into, simple truths that we need to be able to understand these bigger issues that we feel we don't have any power. And I think poets empower us to feel like we can make a difference. I
absolutely,
hope I'm making a difference with my radio show and what I do.
you've made a difference in my life, Mark, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you joining us this hour. This has been a DAW presentation, one of our part of our signature speaker series. And Mark, when we put this together, me and Margaret, you were the first name that we wanted on. So I'm glad we could do
All
this.
right. Well, I just want to say that I'm here at the home taking care of my parents, Joe and Miriam Torres, and they really learned more about me and what I do from your Telejaguar series, and they're going to find out more from this. So,
Right.
I wouldn't be who I am without my parents, and I'm very happy to run all their errands as they're elderly, and I'm trying to protect them as much as possible from, unfortunately, this virus that has, at this date, taken more than 50,000 souls, and so, Jose and Miriam Torres, love you.
See you soon, Mark.
All right, thanks, Matt.